This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 136 here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Nick Maxton alongside myself, Noah Grant, for what should be another great episode. We're finally into November. It feels like we were talking all summer about getting to this point, getting into full swing in conference schedule, getting into full swing in the NHL, although the Minnesota Wild might not be in full swing just yet. Who's to say? But
not at full strength, that's for sure.
You know, besides Thursday's game, they actually had a pretty nice little road swing and a decent return to home, to be honest with you. So we'll discuss all of that, obviously. Of course, college hockey news, another wild week in the college hockey world. It's still crazy out there, Nick, as they say. A very abbreviated Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup today. And when I say abbreviated, I mean like two topics, literally. And then speaking of two topics, our extra ice session, we're going to talk about the Mitchell Miller situation. And also we've got some more clarification on Paul Washy and his situation as well, too. So we're going to dive into all of that and more here in the main portion and extra ice sessions of this show. But first, we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah, and we have to talk about our friends up north. That is the Ottawa Senators, officially for sale. The Eugene Melnyk time is gone, obviously. Supposedly worth $660 million US dollars, about $700 million is what they expect to be sold for. Now, the condition of the sale is that the Senators must stay in Ottawa, which I think is great. Couple of names have been floated around there, Noah. One being Ryan Reynolds is a potential interested party. And mind you, he and Rob McElhenney already own a soccer club over in Europe. So he already has pro sports ownership experience. Yeah. And being a fellow Canadian, I thought that's kind of interesting. You know, if that is actually a name that actually has some traction to it. But nonetheless, this whole thing came about after Eugene Melnyk passed away last year. His, I think, wife now, Anna and Olivia Melnyk, or maybe his kids, inherited it after he passed away. Now, here's what's interesting. Ottawa's National Capital Commission, because there's been talk about the arena. The arena is outdated. We're talking the Canadian Tire Center. Definitely has already been in talks for years. Ask the Calgary Flames fans how arena talks have been going lately. A memorandum of understanding with the Senators and other investors in June signed it for a new downtown arena, but nothing official yet. So when we talk about a memorandum of understanding, it actually means jack crap. It just says, this is what we want. We're going to put it on paper so there's a record of it. Yeah. But there's no legally binding, like, commitment to either side of that. It just says this is what we want.
Well, the issue is, the Canadian Tire Center, which used to be Scotiabank. It's not actually in Ottawa. It's 20 minutes outside of Ottawa in Canada, Ontario. So,
so Arizona fans would know the struggle.
Yeah, I said 20 minutes, not 20 states away. But with that being said, their biggest issue for a long time was their on ice product, and it was partially hindered by the spending or lack thereof for this organization. They've really kind of turned things around. In fact, I would be very curious to see how successful they have been here this season. I mean, they're looking for that new arena, like you talked about, Eastern Conference. They're
a bubble team, I think.
Well, they were doing good, and then suddenly that they've struggled. They're 4-3 in their last 10, so they're actually second to last in the East. They were doing really well, and have really kind of slid off the table in the past week. But nonetheless, I think that there's still a lot of turnaround. They do have a couple of key injuries that are important to note as well too. But yeah, they certainly do need a new arena at some point, because I think Canada is it's a hard place to get to and hard to get to that building, and it's just kind of out of the way of everything in terms of, trying to get fans into that building very easily. So yeah, but nonetheless, it's what's up?
And speaking of which, I don't know if we covered this last week, Noah, about the Arizona Coyotes update from the City Council of Tempe, being that the latest development may be that the City Council may actually put it as a referendum, meaning the City Council is not going to decide the fate of the Arizona Coyotes. It actually will be the residents of Tempe, because there will be some public money, I believe, that goes into, because this is a whole district essentially. So it's restaurants, buildings, I think apartments, plus the arena being the centerpiece. So just wanted to note that since we're talking about arenas, I don't think we covered that last week, or did we?
Yeah, we talked about how we expected the actual residents to be part of that voting process and that sort of thing with that huge complex. But it's a good reminder, obviously, maybe a potential precedent for Ottawa moving forward. Could be. Kind of interesting for Anna and Olivia. Imagine inheriting an entire franchise and being able to sell it. That's not a bad chunk of change they might end up getting for that. $700 million is actually ranks 27th in the league in terms of valuation for an organization. So kind of interesting there. But yeah, that's all we've got on that. Our last topic, very quickly, a couple of injuries and we are out of here. Seth Jones for the Chicago Blackhawks out 3 to 4 weeks with a thumb injury. Alex Stalock was out the other day too. And then I think their third string goalie also got hurt the other night too. So
that's Hawks, man.
Yeah. Well, Hawks they've already gone through, I think it's 5 goaltenders, or they're on their 5th goaltender already this season, which is kind of crazy. I believe the NHL record is 8, and I believe it was the year that Devin Dubnyk came in, if I'm not mistaken. It's Hawks might get there by Christmas. Jeez, the way that this is going. But nonetheless, Seth Jones will be out with a thumb injury for at least a month. Anaheim's Jamie Drysdale on the back end out 4 to 6 months with a torn labrum. That one's tough to see. And then Tampa Bay defenseman Victor Hedman day to day with an upper body ailment. Welcome in episode 136 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Noah Grant, that's me, joined by Nick Maxson on the left of me if you're looking on the YouTube page, or on both sides, I guess, if you're listening to the audio version, depending on headphones or not. But anyhow, I digress. Nick, it was a crazy week around the college hockey world. A lot of exciting.
Seems to be a broken record as of late.
I don't see this changing. I mean, it's just I don't know if the parity has gotten better, or like maybe we're finally starting to see that moment where, players aren't kept because there's not enough scholarship room. You've held off this group of freshmen for an extra year to let some guys finish out their 5th year because of COVID rules or transfer rules and this and that. And I think maybe we're finally starting to see some of these freshmen who have gotten an extra year of development in the NAL, the USHL, wherever they might have played. They're all coming in and really kind of putting teams that we thought were going to be good, maybe on the back burner because they didn't bring those guys in, and then teams that brought those guys in suddenly making some noise, and we didn't expect them to do that.
It's a very curious case, Noah, right? So when we look at the state of college hockey, we're still into, I think this is year 3 of where that extra COVID eligibility could be executed, essentially. I think it's a multitude of things. I think that the game is growing. I do think that the more veteran presence around college hockey teams is part of that. Again, COVID having a major part in that. And I just think that you don't have, besides Michigan and maybe some of the top, but there really isn't a team that's out there that is just dominating. You do have some top teams for sure, but I don't think It's just a deeper level this year, which is great.
You haven't met Harvard apparently at 2-0.
Right, I haven't. Holy cow!
Actually, I think they won.
What am I doing
the other night? They're 3-0, I think now.
Good for them. So, but it's good for the game.
Yeah,
and
I was just gonna ask. Speaking of good for the game, my play-by-play voice for the Toros this past weekend or 2 weekends ago, we were driving down to Bismarck, and he asked me a question that I just kind of thought of. Speaking of the transfer portal, and it was an interesting question because we've got about 2 years left for that incoming freshman class during the COVID year, the first year that happened, to be graduate transfers, basically.
Correct.
And he said, do you think the transfer portal will ever go back? And is it good or detrimental to the game? And his argument was, he said, you should get one free undergrad transfer and one grad transfer.
Which you do.
You used to not get that though. Didn't matter where you were transferring, you had to sit a year.
Yep.
Do you think that the transfer portal will ever go back to the way that it was, or do you think there's going to be some hybrid style? Because right now, theoretically, and there's some guys who have done this, you could play for 5 different teams if you wanted to.
I don't know if we know that answer yet, but if you're looking at the conversation we're having today, and if you're sitting in, the college hockey offices somewhere, probably out east because, Midwest kind of stuff, right? They think they're better, of course, but you have to like what you see. And at the end of the day, the player kind of has the risk of the transfer portal, right? Because we looked at the transfer portal just before training camps were starting with NCAA, and there was still a lot of names that hadn't been picked up.
There's a lot of players who have done that and have lost their scholarship, even if they came back, or they don't get picked up by somebody.
Right. So at the end of the day, I don't know how college hockey is going to look at this moving forward, because from what we see, the results on ice is actually good. I think that the player should have the ability to choose once. I do like the one for undergrad and the one for graduate school. I think
I like that too.
Fine.
Yeah.
Because it kind of marries the best of both worlds. You get into a situation where you're recruited, and I get it. A lot of teams spend countless time, countless money and energy in recruiting these players. Let's just say that it's just not the right fit, or player had one expectation and then ends up being a different one. I get that happens, right? So it's a good check and balance, and I don't think it's extreme one way or the other.
Yeah.
If it were me, I keep it the way it is, because again, when players feel like they have the right to go where they want to go, teams feel like they can go in and grab players that are essentially in the transfer pool to maybe add a piece or two. It's sort of like, shall we say, pro off season style a little bit?
It's interesting. Yeah, it makes it very fun for us to cover it, right?
Yes.
But then he brought up the argument, because I kind of said the same thing, and he brought up the argument. He said, well, what about a team like Dartmouth or Merrimack, who just swept BC for the first time in 25 years? We'll get to that in just a few moments. What if they have a standout stud who they've been waiting for, some guy to build the program around?
Mm-hmm.
He's gone the next year because some big team picks him up. You know what I mean? And some of these other teams might pick up, like, let's say somebody that went to Michigan who didn't play a whole lot, and now they've got a good top line guy. But then other guys who they developed really well there, and then they're like, no, I want to go play at Duluth. I want to go play at North Dakota. I want to go play away from here. And those programs that are in the lower echelon don't get a chance to bolster their ranks back up. It's an interesting conversation. He asked me the question, and at first I was like, I don't know, what do I think of the transfer portal? And then it was like, well, this is actually kind of a curious double-edged sword.
It is a double-edged sword, because let's take that same argument, right? A kid who plays highly touted skill goes to, say, let's actually take Vermont, for example, because they're actually going to have this situation in front of their docket probably next season with a lot of really good recruits coming in. Right?
Great hockey rink, by the way.
Great hockey rink. And with the new coaching and the organization seems to have a little bit new breath of life. Here's the thing. Let's just say that some of these freshmen come in, they go through a season, they're like, this wasn't what I wanted. There is still the risk to the player. I will still own that say Michigan comes in and says, hey, we like what your skill is. We'll give you second line minutes. Let's say that you go into a star-studded Michigan roster, and all of a sudden you're playing fourth line minutes. And now that player's own development because he thought the grass is greener than on the other side isn't quite what he expected.
Yeah.
So there's still it's never a linear equation, right? There's always there's nothing that's guaranteed. So I don't know if it's as I don't know if it's as straightforward as he makes it sound. I get his concern, and I think there is a valid concern there. I just don't know if we can lay that very generalized fear, and I don't think it's applicable for every single team, every single player.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just an interesting conversation. We'd love to know what you think. Find us at Warming House Den on Twitter, HuskiesWarmingHousePodcast.com. We'd love to hear what you think as fans. It's a very interesting conversation that I think is...
Or here's what you do. Maybe you say you have to at least play 2 years.
That's what I said too. I said you have to be an upperclassman to make the move.
Right.
But then he's like, well, if you give them one free transfer, what's the difference? Because they only get one, and then they can do it for their graduate year. If, like I said, if you're playing for Dartmouth for 4 years and then Duluth is like, we really like your game, would you consider coming for a 5th year, going to graduate school? There's a lot of process that goes behind that, which I'm okay with.
Right.
Yeah, well, how about graduating to the big leagues here? We'll start around the NCAA non-NCHC schedule here. Big Ten, Michigan State sweeping Wisconsin this weekend.
No shock.
Great weekend for them. 5-0 and 5-1. Well, you say no shock, but like this Wisconsin team swept Duluth. Like things are weird.
Duluth has not been the team that we had predicted they were going to be either.
Yeah. But they at least were 500 this weekend. We'll get to that obviously, they did what they had to do in night number 2. In fact, the second game was a wild hockey game. Finished there.
Hockey game. Yeah.
Minnesota sweeping Notre Dame. I thought this was going to be a little bit closer than it was. 4-1 and 3-0.
Yeah.
This Notre Dame team might not be as strong as we anticipated. This Penn State team
is much stronger than we thought. Yeah.
3-0 victory on Friday and losing 4-3. They were down 3-0 on Saturday against the Michigan Wolverines and clawed their way back and almost tied that hockey game up. Big Ten offering a lot of intrigue. I would say Minnesota is certainly a big dog. I would say Michigan is certainly a big dog still.
Penn State might be right there.
Penn State might be right there. Ohio State might be right there too. Kind of hard to predict the top 3 here.
I'm not sure if there is really a top 3. There may be a little bit more parity in the Big Ten than we probably anticipated.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hard to say. And it's again, we said this before, it's still early. It's still early.
It is still early. Well, tell Max Veach and the Bulldogs that. Because that's
he knows.
That's all they're clinging on to right now. CCHA 2.0, we had 5 matchups that we're going to get to in this one. Michigan Tech and Bowling Green. Tech won 3-2 and 6-1. This Bowling Green team, just kind of bouncing around here a little bit. It's been kind of interesting for them. Like I said, I see them as a dark horse team when it comes to tournament time in the CCHA. I think anything is that's a conference where anything kind of feels like it's up for grabs. Like in the NCHC, it's hard if you're a 6 or 7 seed to do a whole lot of damage. In the Big Ten, it can be hard if you're that last seed to try to do a lot of damage. CCHA is a whole different ballgame. The top 5 or 6 teams, I think, all have a shot when it comes to the CCHA. So Michigan Tech, pretty decent hockey team this season already, though, I would say. They've had a really good start to the year. This one was a pretty heavyweight tilt this weekend. Ferris State, Bemidji State, 2-2 in overtime in night number 1, and then BSU 2-1 in overtime in night number 2. Bemidji, of course, beating our St. Cloud State Huskies on Friday night last weekend. This Ferris State team, I don't think is that strong, but they seem to give teams a run for their money at various points during the season. Anything you wanted to know?
For Bemidji State, you mean?
Yeah. Is there anything, or do you want me to move on to the next one?
No.
Yeah.
Bemidji State is
curious.
They're a head scratcher because granted, they lost some pretty big names to the transfer portal. I've seen
gained some pretty big names as well. Was it? Jackson Jutting?
Jutting, yep. From North Dakota, right? Am I?
CC, wasn't it?
CC, that's right.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me look. I'm sure I got it wrong, but let's see.
And here's where Bemidji State might be able to do something here. Being in the CCHA, it's not, at least right now, there doesn't seem to be the big dog, shall we say, in the CCHA. Minnesota State still, I think, is the strongest team, but they're definitely not as dominant as they were last year.
Yeah.
Bemidji State is 4-2-2. They're 24th in the pairwise right now. If they can, keep a good conference record, they could be sneaky into that, bubble sort of territory. And
their thing that kind of the victory against St. Cloud will certainly help if the Huskies have the year that it seems like they might. The strength of schedule is the only thing that really hurts them. Speaking of Jackson Jennings, by the way, it was 2 years at CC before heading to Bemidji, so I'm surprised I remember that one. He's from Savage, Minnesota. Is there any recent St. Cloud State Husky that you remember from Savage, Minnesota? Yeah, well, I was going to say Jack, but yeah, both of them. But nonetheless, curious for this Bemidji State team. Will that defensive structure bring them to the promised land? That's the big thing. They're not going to be a heavy offensive hitter. They need games like this, 2-2, 2-1. This is a very prototypical run for them. Minnesota.
That's Tom's territory hockey for sure.
Yeah, certainly is. Minnesota State. We thought the 10-2 victory over St. Thomas was prototypical for them, considering how good we thought they were going to be. 4-3 victory in night number 2. St. Thomas made this one very interesting, and we were all cheering along Ryan Steeg's Tommies and hoping that they would get a victory, I think.
Yeah, and again, St. Thomas, they still are a program that's building. They still lack the skill that some of these other more established clubs have, but they're not going down without a fight. That's the biggest difference we're noticing this year. Noah, is that I think last year, we saw the 40-minute hockey game with St. Thomas where they were sort of in it for 2 periods and then the wheels came off. St. Thomas has given teams a 60-minute push. Again, they're not up there in terms of having the depth that they need to maybe complete some of those comebacks or get ahead of their opponents that are better than them. But they're certainly working hard. They're skating a full 60 and they're making teams earn those victories for a full 60 rather than last year where I think, as I said, there was sort of like this, just not complete games just as of yet.
Yeah, their culmination last year was that game where they almost took one in the playoffs against, the same Mankato Mavericks. But, before that, there wasn't really anything that you went, wow, holy crap. Versus this year, it's like, oh, St. Thomas, a couple of overtime games, one against Penn State, right? And you feel like they're maybe going to get a bounce here and maybe kind of turn the tide a little bit. So that program, like you mentioned, still in the early stages, but we're starting to see some of those cherry trees start to blossom a little bit early for this team, which is very exciting. Northern Michigan University, a sweep of Lake Superior State, 4-1 and 5-3 this weekend. And then non-conference, Alaska Anchorage and Air Force matching up. Air Force getting both of these 5-3 and 3-1. Anchorage has always been a curious case for me. A couple of victories for them this season that have certainly turned some heads. ECAC, the only matchup that we have this week, we do have one, Cornell and Quinnipiac. Of course, Cornell getting swept in some tight contests against Duluth last weekend. Quinnipiac a split against North Dakota. Quinnipiac winning 2-0 in that one. So both of those teams maybe somewhat evenly matched as we go through. Hockey East, another team that is kind of slowly entering the fold as a team to watch here in the East. That is Merrimack.
Yes.
Sweeping Boston College for the first time in 25 years. They had a great weekend last weekend. 3-1 on night number 2 and 5-2 last night. East gets even more interesting. This Connecticut team, UConn, sweeps for them 3-2 and 3-2 first night in overtime against Maine, who maybe isn't the strongest opponent, but this UConn team continues to roll in the pairwise, Nick. And this UMass team in Hockey East, the Minutemen, struggling a little bit here in some facets, getting swept by Providence this weekend, 7-4 and 4-3 in overtime. Hockey East has always been the curious case where when we get to tournament time, we go, oh, there's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 from the Big Ten or the NCHC respectively. And then you're going to have to fill out the rest of the crowd with your auto bid from Atlantic Hockey and your auto bid from the ECAC. But Hockey East here, they might pull 3 or 4 candidates this year, Nick. I mean, they've had some teams that did really well in non-conference schedule early. Still got to be very impressed with all 3 of these groups. Providence, of course, this last weekend, but this UConn team,
yeah, they're turning heads, right?
Keep going, man.
Hockey East, shall we say, has been sort of on a little bit of a downstretch the last few seasons. And let's just say that that's a prideful hockey conference. Yeah. And so when you take a look at the pairwise, right? So Providence, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Boston University, 6 through 8. Or sorry, 5 through 8 there in the pairwise. So, granted, a lot of things can change, but starts are so important for pairwise positioning. So if you can get at least a little bit of, a foundation laid, and from what we've seen, again, Connecticut, when we think that there may be a flash in the pan, they're sticking around. Same thing with Providence. The Friars doing some really good things so far at 6-2-1. And then UMass, again, they're still a good hockey team. Boston University having a bit of a resurgence. But once we get to conference play, that's where these 4 will probably end up separating themselves or climbing the ladder, shall we say. But I do think there's a strong case to be made for a couple of teams out of Hockey East for sure.
Well, we'll see who can catch Harvard in the number 1 spot. With that being said, the only other non-conference Saturday, Sunday matchup, so we won't have game number 2, but 4-3 AIC over RIT. Just something to note, some common opponents in that one. What's on tap for all of these conferences heading into next week? Ohio State travels Thursday, Friday to Michigan State. So keep an eye on that one. This Michigan State team had a good weekend. I have to see if they're kind of the real deal or if OSU can right the ship, or not really right the ship. They didn't play last weekend. So see how they handle that test. Penn State, Minnesota, Thursday, Friday. That is must-watch hockey, I think. The Nittany Lions here.
They're a boom or bust team. They can either catch you asleep. They're fast. They throw pucks on net from just about anywhere. They're averaging 35 or 36 shots a game. And they're playing just kind of gritty, greasy hockey. They're not maybe the most flashy. They do have some skill, but they're playing a very sort of shall we say, Dave Shayak brand of hockey. Just throw the puck to that and then just go towards the net and try to bury those extra chances. So they're scary right now.
Yeah, I certainly would agree. It should be good. Again, Thursday, Friday for that matchup. Don't forget that. Keep that in mind. Michigan will travel to Notre Dame this weekend, and then we'll get to Wisconsin. They are playing an independent team at the bottom of this list. St. Thomas travels to Bowling Green. Should be interesting.
That's an interesting matchup.
This Bowling Green team has kind of, like you said, kind of been up and down. So can St. Thomas catch them on a night or two this weekend? Have to pay attention to that one. Lake Superior State will travel to Michigan Tech. I'm curious to see if the Huskies from up there in Houghton, Michigan, can continue their recent trend of good play and see if they are somewhat the real deal a little bit here in the CCHA, at least to start here. And then Bemidji State will travel to Northern Michigan. Hockey East-wise, BU is at and versus UMass this weekend. So a couple of teams that have had some up and down seasons to start here. We'll take a look at them. You're giving me the deer in headlights look. Did I do something wrong?
No. I'm
just space it out.
I'm spacing out, man.
Well, you know what?
It's been a long weekend.
Hey, if you want to space out when we talk about UMass, feel free by all means, Nick. I know it's hard to take in the state of hockey out there. Maine Merrimack matching
might miss it on the drive. So,
well, at least it's not flat like America's Wasteland. Maine Merrimack next weekend. Maine will be headed on the road there. Curious to see how Merrimack trends this weekend and see if they can get a couple victories. Similar opponent to UConn, and it was both one goal hockey games. So, and then UConn is at and versus Providence, who of course had UMass last weekend. So again, a lot of common opponents coming into the fold here during conference play. Hockey East, a bit of an intrigue here this year. Atlantic hockey, Bentley and Air Force matching up. Don't forget Bentley, a couple of key victories for them this year, especially their opener against Ohio State. Air Force victories against Colorado College, a couple of other common opponents, so pay attention to that one in Atlantic hockey. Then Independence Anchorage is headed down to Arizona State to play the Sun Devils, and then Long Island University is traveling to Wisconsin to play the Badgers. So see how see how LIU does on the road. Of course, LIU common opponent of the Omaha Mavericks a couple weekends ago, so pay attention to that one. NCHC roundup here. Let's get to it here. This is much easier to do when all the teams play each other, Nick. I got to be honest with you.
Usually.
Let's start with Miami, Western Michigan. Western Michigan 7-1 and 5-2. Good little stretch for them. No real surprise there. This Broncos team, I think, is pretty decent this season. Miami, though, still, I think, making strides. I'm curious to see how they do in next week's matchup. But again, the Red Hawks, would just love to see them get some traction in the NCHC again. It would just feel really nice. The other team has figured out that formula a little bit here, Nick. 5-0 victory in night number 1 for the Colorado College Tigers. For whatever reason, we've embraced them wholeheartedly. And 3-1 loss on night number 2 to Duluth. These are both at Ed Robeson Arena, and the game-winning goal came with like a minute and a half left in that hockey game, plus an empty netter at the end of that one. So CC almost pushing that one to overtime and getting a point at least as well too. So
That's been CC's trend this year. They've been really good on Fridays, just can't find the energy or whatever it is to replicate it on Saturdays.
Great at home, too.
Really good at home. So they'll have to find some magic on the road, and they'll have to find a way to get their Saturdays better. If they're able to do one of those two, they're in the middle of the pack of the NCHC. Again, we see the development there. Again, CC, 8-0, Arizona State, 5-0 UMD. They're scoring goals.
Yeah.
Something they've had some trouble with over the last few seasons. So they're making progress.
They certainly have, dude. Like I said, I want this. Their home jerseys, those home whites, just look so sick too. I mean,
and the new golds look really nice too.
Yeah, they do. So
really nice.
They really need to find some traction on the road. I believe they're on the road next weekend. So they need to figure that out for sure if they're going to have any success in the NCHC. But like I said, when I look at 6, 7, 8 in this conference, I'm having a tough time figuring out who that's going to be, Nick. When I'm looking at 1, 2, 3 in this conference, I'm having a tough time figuring out who that's going to be. There's some teams that you look at that you can say, yeah, we expect them to be somewhere in the middle, 3 to 6, somewhere. Duluth might fit that mold very well right now. And as a team that we don't know where they're going to be, but we can give a pretty good range. Can we say 1 through 8? Anyway, with that being said, North Dakota traveled to Baxter Arena in Omaha. North Dakota winning 4-1 in night number 1, and Nebraska Omaha winning in the shootout 4-3 in night number 2. Great win for the Mavs here, kind of stealing a couple points from North Dakota this weekend.
The Mavs over the last little bit have given UND fit.
Yeah,
they have, especially up at REA. It's one of those just buildings that Omaha just finds an extra gear for whatever reason. They just don't make it easy for the Fighting Hawks, and it's kind of curious right now. You always have like those away buildings where it's almost like you're in the Ralph, you know the atmosphere. It's almost like it's in the opposing player. You just kind of get this extra boost where you're like, I really want to shut this fan base down, or I just really want to come in here and really take the crowd out of it. For whatever reason, UNO just seems to have some magic there at the Ralph, and for us other NCHC opponents, good to see.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was 2, maybe 3 years ago where North Dakota. Yeah, well, North Dakota was basically unbeatable at home, and Omaha went in there and they took not only that, but I think they took 3 of 4 from North Dakota that year. I mean, it was a great showing for them. So, this Maverick team, again, a lot of intrigue in the NCHC. You never know what you're going to get on any given night, and that's what makes it one of, if not the best conference in college hockey. Last matchup. Couple of big dogs here. St. Cloud State traveling to Magnus Arena in Denver. Nick, the Huskies finally did it in night number 1, vindicating some demons. It was an 8-game losing streak at Magnus Arena before
2016.
Yes, that is correct. St. Cloud State 4-3 in overtime, and then 3-2 losing to DU in night number 2. So a great comeback in night number 1. It was some fantastic hockey back and forth. Really, the entire weekend was some great hockey. And I think that this St. Cloud team, that the fear was that they were going to go into this building and have at least one night, if not both of them, where the goal spread was high. And they weren't able to kind of stave off the onslaught, so to speak.
Right.
They showed me a team that was calm, cool, composed, and poised to at least take a couple of points out of this weekend. Theoretically, Denver theoretically left with theoretically left with an extra point. All things considered, the way that the point breakdown shook out. But nonetheless, let's start with Friday here before Nick coughs up a lung. Yami Kranila. I got
one left, so.
Yeah. Yami Kranila's third of the season from Chase Brent and Zach Okabe got the scoring started in period number 1. Denver University tying the game in the first period as well, and then grabbing one in period number 2 for a 2-1 edge heading into period number 3. Grant Cruikshank, a laser. His 7th of the season, bar down. What a shot this was from Dylan Anhorn and Micah Miller in period number 3. I mean, a great one-time shot from the bumper there.
And what about that play from Dylan Anhorn to step up, go down the half wall, and then Cruikshank finding that soft spot too? Just a nice overall exchange between those two as well.
Yeah, it was a really nice play. Denver, with only a couple minutes remaining in period number 3, looked like we were supposed to have a DU victory. It looked like they were ready to take it home, that sort of thing. Not to be. Extra attacker goal for the Huskies. Zach Okabe's 5th of the season from Spencer Meyer and Jack Peart. A nice little gritty one-time opportunity that was blocked, and then the rebound puck on net in the back of the net to tie that game with just over a minute to play. I mean, headed to overtime, and Vietti Miettinen, his 3rd of the season from Grant Cruikshank, a nice crossing pattern zone entry, passed by Jack Peart on the secondary assist in overtime. Shots on goal 27-25 in favor of Denver. Faceoffs 28 for 56. Both teams exactly 50% on draws in night number 1. Penalty kill was 2 for 2, and power play, I believe, was 2 for 2 for the 0 for 2 for the Huskies in night number 1. I don't think anybody had a power play goal in night number 1. And Jackson Castor 24 saves on 27 shots in night number 1. Nick, I want to talk about something because that's what we do on this show. Because we talked about it on Twitter a little bit, and I appreciate the response from more clappers and a lot of the other people who are talking about the game winner on Friday night, and specifically, and I'm sure you got a chance to see that game and got a chance to see that game winner, and talking about 3-on-3 overtime in the back check of Carter Mazur, who of course was a U.S. national development player, played a boatload of minutes in that hockey game, and I think was out for pretty much the entire overtime in that game.
He was too, yep.
So, Nick, there's 2 camps. There's Noah Grant, and then there's everybody else. Are we shocked? But my argument was that nice crossing pattern that allowed separation for Vietti Miettinen to have an extra 3 feet of space to rip that puck home, blocker side high for the game winner on the zone entry. Carter Mazur probably close enough to maybe disrupt that play when Miettinen comes through. He's covering his man coming through on the back check. How did you see this play? Was Carter Mazur, was he out of position, or was he not putting in the effort to disrupt a play? Was he right where he was supposed to be? How did you interpret this goal? If you're David Carl and you're breaking down this video, how do you interpret it?
I wish we could see the shift time for him, because it looked like to me the guy was out of gas.
Yeah.
And positioning was fine. But, there's executing, right? And again, in the game of hockey, we talk about how at every level you get better. Know that time and space, that half second, is a lot more than, and it actually has a more impact to go against you, especially on the defensive side of things. If you let him have it, right? And we know Vietti Miettinen does not need a whole lot of time or space. He's got the release, and if you're an opposing player and you're looking at the 3 that are around there, you got to know that one guy is going to, the shooter, right? Now, granted, Cruikshank has been a stalwart for this club early on. In fact, I'm a little worried that Cruikshank at some point is going to end up getting in a dry streak, because you have to pay attention to him, right?
Yeah.
But to me, I saw a guy that I get it. You're seeing a guy that's not moving his feet. I think that was the biggest thing that people took from it is that's a lazy back check. He could have gone in there. But let's not forget, too, Carter Mazur, newest national development program. He's got the smarts. He's got the skill. I just think he was gassed. I really do think he was gassed.
So, and again, my argument with this, so I'm curious to see if you agree or disagree here. My argument was, could he have committed and tried to, make a play on Miettinen? Sure. But if Miettinen pulls him out of position, then he's leaving his man wide open. And 3-on-3 is man-on-man hockey. Do you feel like, even though he was gassed, do you feel like he was still in the right position when it came to 3-on-3 overtime, in between the man and the puck carrier, even though he was gassed? Like if you're David Carl, do you look at that and say, okay, he didn't disrupt the play, but he's in the appropriate position? Not that it's any consolation, because the puck ended up in the back of the net. We know that. Defenseman got caught a little bit too deep covering Miettinen on that crossing pattern. But do you look at Carter Mazur, would it be cause for concern where you would mention, hey, you need to move your feet, you need to make a play here? Or do you say, it wasn't your guy? Is there an argument to say it wasn't your guy? You were playing man on man, you have to trust your teammate to make a play. How do you interpret that?
I'm trying to find the video to kind of read.
Yeah. If you end up,
here we go. Here it is. Okay. Yeah. Let me turn down the volume here.
Yeah, we'll watch it live.
So we're doing it live. So when you look at this, it's 2-on-2. It's 2-on-2 at the line.
Yep.
And it's one of those curious cases where I think he's in the right position there, right? You have to trust to make a play. Again, the crossing pattern, and here's what people forget. Grant Cruikshank does the right thing.
Yep.
When he crosses over, the casual fan says, I'm trying to go around. No, he actually goes straight at the defender to essentially create almost like a pick.
Yeah, it's basically you're forcing, like we said, 3-on-3 is man on man. So you're forcing those two defenders to decide, do I stay with the man I'm with
or do I switch?
And that's what allows that extra 3 feet of space, because the weak side D man, well, he's the strong side D man until Cruikshank crosses over and drops the puck. And then it comes back to him and he goes, oh shit, I'm about 3 feet too deep.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Huskies entering the zone, right, I think the trailer was Jack Peart there, right? So if we pause it at the exchange between Cruikshank and Miettinen, Carter Mazur is actually in really good possession, honestly. He's a stick link, but let's talk about this. If he overcommits to Miettinen, now granted, Cruikshank opened himself up for the one-time option. There was a little bit where the Duluth defensemen did kind of come together a little bit, right? So they got a little bit too close to each other. We're having a different conversation because we're going to make Carter Mazur out to be the guy that is in the wrong anyway here. If you're a Denver fan, which is if he overcommits and Miettinen sees all 3 guys are around him, he's got a small drop pass and Jack Peart has got a wide open lane to either take a shot on that or to go low to Grant Cruikshank. Either way, you have to be trustworthy there. He's in good position. I think the argument is, well, could he have disrupted a little bit? I mean, maybe. But at the end of it, I don't know if I see anything really, truly wrong on that film for Carter Mazur in terms of what he was supposed to be doing and where his position was. I think he was in the right spot, right time.
Well, Nick and I didn't talk about this pre-show, by the way.
No, we did not. I actually didn't know you were doing this.
Yeah. So shocker, right? My final thought was that, if Mazur engages, let's say he tries to lift the stick and he's on the outside there and Miettinen takes him and the defender with, Jack Peart is all alone in the slot. And if that puck gets through, you're leaving your weak side defenseman 1-on-2.
Yeah, exactly.
On the weak side. So, just very curious to see how you saw it there. But again, perspective is everything. Like I said, it's easy to, when you slow the game down or you see how, even when he was gassed, how quickly he closes that gap Carter Mazur does, even when he's not moving his feet. Think about it. When you talked about when that exchange, that drop pass was made, he's with Jack Peart darn near the face-off dot at center ice. And by the time the play is over, he is almost at the top of the circles, right? Like that's like 2 seconds.
If you want to talk about even more hockey IQ, as he's skating through center ice, Carter Mazur is looking around. Again, his assignment is Jack Peart. He is above him, so he's between his goaltender and the opposing player. Again, it's one-on-one coverage there. And again, if you're David Carty looking at this, I think he's in the right spot there. And again, Vietney, let's say it this way. Let's see if that's Mike Miller, a right-handed shot coming through. I think Mazur has a little bit more of a play here, but because Miettinen is a left-handed shot going wide, again, you drag him. If Miettinen is smart, he drags it wider. Again, the defenseman coming back over committing and Mazur drags away from the center of the ice. It's a 2-on-1 for the Huskies, and it's even a more dangerous scoring chance. And again, Miettinen,
what a shot!
What a shot!
Yeah.
I mean, it's right above the pad, right below the blocker, through a screen. That's a goal scorer's goal. So if you're going to lose on a play, there's a lot of things that the Huskies did at such a high level so quickly. Those fine details, right? I don't know if Mazur is the GOAT here. It really is just a good, nice executed play.
It's hard to blame the guy who's the high guy in that play. The play is, in some sense, it doesn't involve him because him and Jack Peart are essentially not part of the play until they want to make themselves part of the play. Like I said, if Mazur wants to try to commit, and like I said, if he lifts the stick, turns the other way, makes a play, we're going, wow, what a great player. We don't even think about it, but if he, like I said, if he overcommits, Miettinen gets around both of them and drops it to Jack Peart in the slot, well, then every DU fan is going, what the hell is Carter Mazur doing? Because he left his man, So, hockey is not necessarily a game of the here and now. Sometimes it's 1-2 steps ahead in that anticipation. 3-on-3, very free flowing, and that's what makes it extremely exciting. Night number 2 on Saturday, 3-2 victory for the Denver Pioneers, getting the first 2 goals of the hockey game, 1 in period 1 and 1 in period number 2. Then Yami Kranila in the middle of the second period, a power play goal from Jack Peart and Zach Okabe in the middle frame. Duluth answering with a power play marker of their own. And then Grant Cruikshank from Vieti Miettinen and Dylan Anhorn at the tail end of the game in period number 3. in the loss. Shots 35-30 in favor of the Denver Pioneers. Faceoffs 27-69 for the Huskies, though. Yikes. 39.1%. Got to clean that up, obviously. 1 for 4 on the power play, though. You like to see it. 3 for 4 in the PK. Would have liked the extra kill, but is what it is. Dominic Bassey, 32 saves, 35 shots on net. Nick, night number 2, little bit of a different story, but I mean, I still think a well-contested hockey game where two good hockey teams slugging it out here.
It really was. Granted, I think St. Cloud shot themselves in the foot a little bit with some of the penalties and things that they took. Again, having Crandall go out with that cross-checking major does not help at all. Now, before that happened, he ended up having that one-time power play absolute snipe into the DU net. So at the end of it, it's still a really good game. I mean, again, they're both 1-goal games.
Yeah.
Both 1-goal games. I think Denver probably was a little bit more of a, they played their game a little bit better on Saturday. I think, again, and granted, St. Cloud did not make it easy for themselves either. I think you take away some of those penalties, especially the major, that game maybe goes the other way, maybe, but still a 1-goal game. I think we've learned anything with this matchup, Noah, is if we thought Denver is good, which they are, St. Cloud is right there with them. You talk about a measuring stick. This was, and these two teams are neck and neck.
Yeah, certainly were. If you look at the NCHC standings, you wouldn't think so, but that's because we are just getting started here. So Denver is leading the pack, 3-1 in the season, 10 points for them. Western Michigan behind with 6 points, the only other team to be undefeated in both regulation. The only team to be undefeated in regulation and overtime, 2-0 on the season for them. North Dakota 1-0-1, getting the extra point to put them in third with 4 points. Minnesota Duluth, CC, both 1-1 in that 4 and 5 spot, both at 3 points. Huskies right behind them in 6, 1 less point because of
overtime.
The overtime points that they picked up. And then Omaha. So essentially, the Huskies had a win, but they lose a point because of winning in overtime instead of in regulation. Omaha picking up a couple of loser points as well, too. 2 points for them on the season. And then Miami. Sorry, not loser points, shootout points. Get it together, Noah. And then Miami in last 0-4 on the season. See if the Redhawks can turn it around. What's on tap in the NCHC? Omaha travels up to Duluth. Very curious to see if the Mavs can maybe pounce on a Duluth team that's reeling a little bit here.
Reeling big time.
Colorado College will travel to Miami. Another intriguing matchup to see if the Redhawks can bounce back, or can CC finally figure out their road woes and get a couple points here in the NCHC. Denver will travel to North Dakota. A couple of big heavyweight hitters, and the Huskies doesn't get any easier for them. St. Cloud welcomes Western Michigan for their first conference home matchup of the season. Historically, have done a little bit better against the Broncos at home.
Yep.
What do you anticipate out of this matchup, Nick?
This is 2 high-flying offenses right now. Western Michigan, again, they put up how many 12 goals this last weekend? 7 and 5, I think. I mean, it was a lot. We'll put it to you this way.
Yep.
They have quite the unique chemistry with how that team is constructed right now. They've got speed, they've got skill, they got a little bit of grit and sandpaper. I think they're more dangerous than people give them credit for. Again, last year, rode the wave all the way to the NCAA tournament, getting in their first ever appearance and win. Now, granted, Western Michigan, this is their only time that St. Cloud will see them this year, thank goodness. And it's also at home, which helps. But I think for the Huskies, the big thing here was going to be defensive structure. If you can slow down and maybe start to frustrate Western Michigan, you're going to have last change. You'll be able to get the matchups that you want. That should help. But this one, if it gets free flowing, again, the Olympic sheet, so you have a lot more room out there, this could end up being a high scoring series. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, the question is, who wins the goaltending battle here, I feel like, because Western Michigan, they've gotten goaltending early, but they've also had a couple of games where they made it a little interesting. That loss against Anchorage, obviously, earlier in the season, where they outshot their opponents, but couldn't, buy a bounce in that one. This Bronco team, I think we talked about how difficult they are to get a read on. We picked them to finish 5th in the NCHC, Duluth to finish 3rd. Now that might be a little bit flip-flopped here to start the season as well, too. So it's a very intriguing matchup. What do you predict will be the outcome here? Do you think the Huskies come away with a sweep? Do you think the Broncos come in and take all the points? Do you think we have overtime? Do we get a split? What do you think?
I think it's a split series. I think St. Cloud wins Friday. I think Western Michigan bounces back on Saturday. I do think they're going to be a little bit more high scoring, like 4-3. I think they're going to be 1-goal games. I don't see overtime in this series. I do think it's going to be one team that finds their game, kind of controls that game. So I'm going to split and regulation wins for both squads.
Yeah, I like that breakdown as well. Well, let's talk about breakdowns. Let's talk about the pairwise here very quickly here. Everyone's favorite Harvard is still at the number 1 spot. The Huskies at 8-2 are still clinging on to spot number 2, and the team they just played, the Denver Pioneers, right behind them in number 3 at 7-3. Very fair, I
Good
think.
Spot
very,
to be.
Very appropriate. Penn State at 9-1 is in 4. Penn State certainly a top 5 team right now. You can't argue that with the past couple of weekends they've had, at least as of now. Providence in 5th, a little bit interesting there. UConn in 6th, UMass in 7th, which is very confusing to me because they have not had the greatest start. Anyway, BU in 8. Also curious, they're 4-3. Minnesota is 9th. I feel like the Gophers maybe should be a little bit higher, maybe in like 6 or 7.
That's where I would think.
That fair to say?
Yep.
Minnesota, Ohio State, Michigan all together. I would flip flop the Hockey East teams besides UConn.
Big 10, yeah,
and
UConn.
Yeah, so number 12 is UMass Lowell, Minnesota State 13, Quinnipiac 14, Western is at 15, Michigan State at 16. Tech, Sacred Heart, Merrimack, Northeastern. So certainly some sorting out to be done here. I think North Dakota for NCHC teams is at 23. Miami is at 28, which is good for them. Bemidji State's at 24, by the way, with Notre Dame behind North Dakota. Omaha's at 33. Duluth is right next to them at 34. And then Colorado College is at 45, which surprises me a little bit, to be honest with you. I figured they would be a little bit higher. They are right next to Wisconsin this season. So St. Thomas well ahead of a lot of these teams in the pack here. Not a whole lot to go through the pairwise here, Nick.
No,
just quick take. Is there anything you wanted to add here that
Well, again, I mentioned before the pairwise. It's good. Getting established early helps a lot. So for St. Cloud, they might bounce up and down here and there, but being in that top 5, top 10. If you can get there and stay there towards the, at least get there through the holiday break, then you start to see where, and this is where the NCHC becomes tough, right? If you can keep established, that's kind of what floated them a little bit last year was their good non-conference record. It was another good one this last season here. So they're in a good spot, but it doesn't get any easier from here. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. Again, there could be some topsy-turvy movements with Hockey East being on there because we haven't seen them there in quite some time, at least the number of teams.
Yeah, certainly would agree. Men's hockey heating up around the NCAA world. WCHA women on the other side. Sacred Heart traveling to Mankato for some non-conference action. The Mavs getting both of those 4-1 and 5-1. Ohio State Saturday, Sunday matchup against St. Thomas. Ohio winning 4-0 in day number 1. Excuse me. So game number 2 is going to be played today. So we don't have an answer on that one. Duluth traveling to Minnesota. This Bulldogs team has been giving some of these high-end teams fits, and the Huskies have certainly, I'm sure, been very happy that they have not taken a couple more points here. 3-2 victory for the Gophers in overtime on Friday. 5-3 victory for the Maroon and Gold on Saturday. Although I say Maroon and Gold, like people would know who I'm referring to. The Gophers sweeping that series, and then St. Cloud. Featuring Bemidji State. What a great weekend for this team, Nick. 2-0 and 3-1 for the women. Recapping Friday night's action, Emma Gentry from Taylor Lynn and Clara Himlarova in period number 2, and Olivia Savar from Dale Ross in that middle frame as well. Victory 25-15 shots on goal, a very tight checking defensive game. Face-offs 15 for 42, Nick, 35.7%.
Still a struggle on that. Yikes.
Face-off, we need some help, man. But although 0 for 4 on the power play, perfect 3 for 3 on the PK.
PK has been so good this year.
Sonia Hola, 15 stops, 15 shots, 3rd career shutout for her. Night number 2, 3-1 victory for the women. McKenna Westlow on the power play from Grace Wolf and Nina Newland in the first period. Emma Gentry also in period number 1 from Olivia Savar. And then Clara Himlarova on the power play from Nina Newland and Grace Wolf also in period number 1. And then Bemidji tacking one on in period number 3. Shots 29-26 the other direction in favor of the Beavers in night number 2. Faceoffs much better at night number 2 for the Huskies, though, 32 for 55 at a 58.2% clip. 2 for 6 on the power play today, Nick, and a perfect 5 for 5 on the PK. Exactly what you love to see.
Good.
JoJo Chobak, 28 saves on 29 shots, Nick. What a great weekend for this club. We talked about how they had to have these games against St. Thomas, how they had to have these games against Bemidji State. Could they carry the great games that they had against your Wisconsins, against your Ohio States, against your Minnesotas? Could they vie for that 4th spot in the WCHA, Nick? As of recording today, that's where they're at.
That's exactly where they're at. How awesome, right? This was the turnaround that we've been waiting for this club for, shall we say, a couple of years? I mean, yes. Can we go there? I think we can.
Since we started doing this, probably, you know what? I don't want to throw people under the bus, but I would say maybe since the tail end of the Eric Rude era.
Yeah, it's and it shows, and I don't want to throw any shade to anybody in particular.
They've just struggled. That's
they've struggled, and in our eyes, right, the hockey keen eyes, the keys were there. It's could we get someone to get the dang engine started? And it certainly seems like Brian Idalski has gotten this engine started, and it's running pretty good right now. Granted, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're still early. I know we keep using that as a broken record, but for Huskies,
did you hear that it's early?
Oh, no, I didn't know that. Okay. But you have to like what you see, right? We said, okay, if we're going to claim success or claim that we have taken steps, they've been giving the top 3 fits. Now, granted, some of the scores were lopsided, but if you actually watch those games, there's a lot to like when they played Ohio State, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, right? So the win-loss record wouldn't show up, but the actual games played would show you that there was progress. So then we said, okay, 0-6, not great, but let's now go to these teams that maybe on paper you should beat. They've done that. They've won 4 in a row now, outscoring their opponents, I think now 14-2 in that stretch.
And they've played the right way.
Yes.
And that's the thing that's been so exciting is, you can say, let's say a couple years ago, you steal one against Minnesota. Oh, you stole one against Duluth. Well, the key word, you stole one. Why did you steal one? Because you weren't the dominant hockey team. Now St. Cloud is the aggressor. They're on their toes. They're controlling pace of play. It's a much different look of a hockey team. And for those who are curious, why do we talk about the 4th spot in the WCHA? Top 3s are largely untouchable. And we're going to go over the points right now. 4th spot here would be a very successful season for the Huskies. So points breakdown, Ohio State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, 28, 27, and 21 points respectively at 9-1-1, 9-0-1, and 7-1 in the season. Wisconsin was off this weekend, so little bit reason for that extra point disparity. 3 points for a win, don't forget, in regulation. St. Cloud is 4th right now at 4-6. Like you mentioned, they were 0-6. They're now 4-6, 13 points on the season, right ahead of Mankato, who's got 10 points at 3-7. So again, one less victory for Mankato is the separator right now between them and the Huskies. Minnesota Duluth at 3-5 at 9 points. Like we talked about, they easily could have climbed up to that 4th spot had they stolen a game or two that they were in very tight against Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio State. Bemidji State sitting in 7th at 1-9 at 3 points. And then St. Thomas 0-7 yet to get a victory. But Nick, I mean, it's literally the top 3 spots and then 4 through 8 best of the rest here. And right now, St. Cloud State is making a very good case to be the last home team in the WCHA playoffs. I mean, it's been fantastic to see. And like you said, it's early, but what a refreshing breath of fresh air, right? Like it's just been fantastic.
And you see it in their play too. As I mentioned, when I was calling their games a couple of weeks ago, it was immediately obvious the different structural changes, how much more disciplined and better puck management there were. It just seems, I think we talked about this ad nauseum too, Noah, and that is these teams in the past, we saw the skill, we just didn't see, shall we say, the IQ side of hockey and the decision making, that was sort of what we thought was lacking.
Yeah.
Now we do see a more confident and more higher hockey IQ team on the ice, and they're executing what Idalski and the vision that he has for this team. Strong defensive play, great puck support in all three ends, and as you mentioned, get on your toes and go attack.
Yeah.
Right. I think for a lot of the frustrations we've had with this club over the last couple of seasons was essentially they survived.
Yeah.
They were tired. They had long shifts, and they could never counterattack. Now they're creating turnovers in the defensive zone, or they're really creating teams having nightmares entering the zone, which is really good. They're contesting pucks, right? And then they're getting those loose pucks. They're winning battles, and they're going, let's go north. It's time for us to go attack.
Yeah, and the defensive structure breeds offense, right? And it's not necessarily, where, you get a turnover and then you set up behind your net and you regroup and you try to do that. No, their turnover is exactly for the purpose of creating a turnover quickly and turning the other way, transitioning, switching lanes and going with numbers, creating odd man rushes, 3-on-2s, 2-on-1s, the other direction. And that is the difference. And let's not forget, we talk so much about Brian Idalski and the vision that he's brought to this team. I think we'd be remiss if we mentioned Molly Engstrom had a hand in this too, for sure, but a player like Janelle Sergey and the offensive style, kind of the let the horses run type of mentality as a coach, right? And the structure that she's tried to implement for so many years where she wants to break open that offense. One of the best offensive players in her day, a U.S. Olympian, Wisconsin Badger as well too. She is someone that has been kind of pining away for this transitional game and high speed and skill for a while, and finally has found a coaching match, so to speak, and a guy like Brian Idalski who knows how to unlock that potential in these players. It's been fantastic to see. What's on tap here in the WCHA? Ohio State, St. Thomas on Sunday. Today, essentially, game number 2. Monday, St. Cloud State will be playing Minnesota November 7th, 7 p.m. Andover Community Center Women's Hockey Hall of Fame game. So make sure that you tune into that one so we don't have that answer to that score, obviously, right now. St. Thomas, Thursday, Friday, non-conference against Lindenwood. And then Duluth will play St. Cloud Friday, Saturday as normal. And then on Monday, UW-Eau Claire plays a non-conference game against Mankato. So a very weird schedule right now in the WCHA. A lot of teams off, a lot of other teams playing at very random times here. So, like we said, very, very weird in general. This is the matchup that I think is really going to tell us a lot here, Nick. This Duluth team who has given some of these big dogs fits. Really right now, I see St. Cloud, Duluth, and maybe Mankato, a 3-way jumble for trying to get that 4th spot in the WCHA as of right now. I feel like Bemidji State and St. Thomas, at least earlier, are a little bit out of the mix here. What do you expect, man?
It's going to be a dogfight, for lack of a better phrase, right?
Nice.
I know you set me up for it. I'm sorry. But honestly, though, St. Cloud has put themselves in a position where, let's think of it this way, right? We talked about how important the 4 or 5 spot is. I'm less worried about 4, but if they can be either 4 or 5, you're avoiding the big 3 in the first round.
This team is capable of it, too.
And they are.
Yeah.
And they are. So it's going to be, they have a tough test against the Gophers again. But let's go back to the Gopher series. They made that interesting.
Yeah.
And now you're riding a 4-game win streak.
Wisconsin, too.
Yeah. So it's like, well, now that they have gotten better for these 4 games, they've gotten better a little bit. They've cleaned up some things defensively.
Yeah.
Now, can you get that one goal? Can you can you actually execute? Because there was a couple of times against the Minnesota game where they could have scored and they would have went up 2-1 late in that third. We were watching the game, I think, in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And it's, if you can find a way to just get one bounce, you have to feel confident about your chances as a squad going against Minnesota. When was the last time that we truly sat here together on this podcast and this women's team has a chance not to steal a game, meaning you get a bounce and you don't deserve the win, but actually deserve and play the right way to beat the Gophers, right? It's 2 different things.
Yeah, certainly would agree. And, you talk about, I think the Ohio State series was maybe the only series where the Huskies didn't come out with the greatest strength. And then after that, it was a good retool and a very quick change on the fly, so to speak. And it has been impressive. And you talked about, the top end teams, you expect them to probably at least get a split at the worst on the weekend. But you know what? The Huskies now have turned into the aggressor on offense. And like you said, it's not, you don't go into period number 3 going, oh, if they can just hold them off till we get to overtime, or if they can just, carry this 2-1 lead and, face an onslaught of 25 shots, and that's going to be that. And if they can hang on, well, good for them. No, it's, okay, can they get that separating goal? Can they create their own luck? Can they create their own bounces? You talk about getting a bounce. That all starts with fundamental play. It starts with good defensive play, great transition to the neutral zone, willingness to be aggressive on the forecheck and in the offensive zone with some extended zone time. So I am very curious to see this matchup next weekend. What's up?
And shall we say the whole hockey adage is sometimes, or a lot of times actually, a lot of the puck luck, you can create your own puck luck by, like you said, doing the right things fundamentally, in somehow, some way. And it's for the casual, it really doesn't make sense, but I think for us it does. All of a sudden, instead of chasing the puck's finding you. And I think that's what St. Cloud is starting to transition to, is the puck's finding them in the right areas because they're doing the right things and they're getting those bounces now, as opposed to nothing really going their way in previous seasons.
Yeah, well, let's talk about things maybe not going your way to start a season. The Minnesota Wild, our last topic in the main portion of the show. Yay.
What a transition that was.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Wild should learn how to transition in their own zone. How about that?
Oh, boy.
5-5-1 in the season, 11 points for them. They're 2 points out of third in the Central and 1 point out of the second wild card spot still somehow. -5 goal differential. Past week, only 2 games for them. 4-1 victory where they looked very good against Montreal, and then a 4-0 loss. An absolute egg against Seattle at home.
That was ugly.
Yeah, that was absolutely terrible. What's on tap here for this team? Los Angeles Kings in LA Tuesday, in Anaheim on Thursday, in Seattle on Friday, and then back home Sunday against San Jose. So as far as the wildcard standings, like we mentioned in the Western Conference, it's Dallas, who's had a great start to the season. Dallas, Winnipeg, and then Colorado getting both those games over in Finland at 17, 15, and 13 points respectively. And then wildcard, Edmonton at 14 points, Chicago at 12 points.
Chicago of all teams.
Yeah, and then Calgary, Minnesota, and Nashville all at 11 points. So the Wild somehow still in the mix here. Still time for them to figure it out, but has not been the greatest start. The goal differential will never, I don't think, be on their side, at least for a while, because of the first couple of games here. We're kind of riding high on what was a pretty good road trip, all things considered, for the Wild, and then coming back home, great response against Montreal. And then Thursday, this looked like a Wild team that had no jump, no gas, 11 forwards, 7 defensemen. The experiment didn't really work out with all the injuries. And that's time
what's
off
hurting them right now is the injuries.
Time off was much needed. The report is that Jordan Greenway might be ready for Tuesday in LA. Ryan Hartman's out long term, and the other guys are kind of day to day. But didn't help losing Marcus Foligno, and that Thursday's game was brutal.
And for remind me, because I may have missed it, for Ryan Hartman, was that upper body, right?
Yeah, it was when he got in that fight and
when he fell down, right? It was kind of a weird looking...
I wonder if it's like a wrist injury, the way he was kind of holding his arm, but it
looked like it, but again, we don't know for sure, so we won't speculate.
Just very Matt Dumba-esque from a couple years ago,
Yeah. Yikes. And we'll just have to wait and see. Honestly, I'm not as down on the Wild as I think people want me to be. Granted, they started off
hard to evaluate, only 2 games in a week,
right. And let's be honest here too. When was the last time that we saw the Wild actually throw a dud like they did against Seattle? It's been a while.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Certainly has. Well, let's remember the Wild. What is it? They lost their first 2 or 3, and they're 5-5-1. So like we said, or they lost their first 2, won their third, lost their fourth, and then they had a good stretch of 4 games that they won before they're done against Seattle. So there's been things that have been trending the right way,
right?
But it's just
it takes time.
Yeah, haven't had that consistent we've strung 5 wins together and we've looked good, or we strung 4 wins and a loss together, but in the loss it was a 3-2 OT loss and we looked really good and probably could have won the game. Just hasn't really had that feel like I felt like we had last year, where this team never really felt like they were out of hockey games even when they were struggling a little bit. So I don't really know that we need to spend a whole lot of time on the Wild. There wasn't a whole lot to evaluate. This week will, I think, give us a much better answer. 4 games, of course, 3 that we'll be able to cover by the time that we hit Sunday, although we might hit 4, by the way, depending on the way the schedule shakes out with what we've got going on this weekend. We'll give you an update on that, by the way, too, as far as scheduling, whether we record on Sunday or maybe even Monday. Nick's got some travel doing some hockey games, so that's exciting, obviously. So with that being said, Nick, we're going to head on to our final portion of the show. We're going to do our extra ice session where we're going to talk about both Mitchell Miller and Paul Washe. And welcome into the extra ice session. Nick Maxon alongside myself, Noah Grant. Nick's got a beautiful smile on his face. Caleb, if you're going back to the video here, as soon as I said that, his smile went away. He was annoyed by that, apparently.
No, because we know how Caleb likes to screenshot my smiles, said no one.
Yeah, but you look nice. You have your glasses on. Your lighting looks good. You're drinking some water. You're well hydrated.
That's a first. Yes.
I don't know, man. I like it anyway. What we don't like, this is there was also some Hockey Canada news this week. I left that out because we can only handle so much.
No, exactly.
Yeah, Mitchell Miller, for those who missed it, essentially was signed by the Boston Bruins organization and was supposed to report to AHL's Providence. Some people
keyword supposed to.
Yeah, some people were not keen on that, namely a man named the commissioner of the National Hockey League, Gary Bettman, among other people. And essentially,
let's just say the media consensus has been largely negative.
Yeah, and rightfully so. So essentially, to kind of walk you through the Bruins signing him, and we'll get to who Mitchell Miller is in a second, but signing him and Gary Bettman essentially saying, nope, we were not consulted on that. We do not. I mean, you can sign him, but he's not going to play in the NHL. Per our bylaws right now, he is not eligible to play in the NHL based on his past conduct and his recent conduct, so to speak. AHL currently reviewing their bylaws to see if he can even report to the minor league club in Providence. For those who don't remember, essentially when he was 14 years old, it was him and another gentleman who essentially were picking on a student with a disability and essentially urinated on a lollipop and urinal and made the kid eat it. And since then, the other individual in this incident has since fully apologized to the victim's family and to the victim, and they've accepted that apology. Mitchell Miller has not done that, and his only apologies have been Instagram-style apologies that are pretty much almost like court-ordered at best, the way that they feel, because you can tell he
written by a lawyer.
Yeah, you can tell he just wants to play hockey. Of course, he was picked up by the University of North Dakota, drafted by Arizona. Arizona dropped him. North Dakota dropped him. He spent a year in the USHL where he did absolutely tear it up. And the USHL had a really great season. The Bruins liked what they saw, decided to sign him, and now we've hit this point here. And the essential argument is, well, he was 14. You know, we all do stupid stuff when we're 14. There's things to be remorseful about. You know, we need to move on. We need to give people a second chance. We've talked about this with the Logan Mailloux situation, which was a messy situation. We've talked about, other gamuts of things like that. But the counter argument to that is he really hasn't apologized. He really hasn't been remorseful. All he wants to do is to do this so he can play hockey. And Gary Bettman, in his statement, said he's not eligible to play in the NHL. And then the next part I thought was interesting. He may never be eligible to play in the NHL. Nick, this is a messy situation. And we talked about how we were willing to say people can change, people can grow, but they need to show that to us. And the hockey world has given us a boatload of that recently. Got to say, man, it's hard to be at Mitchell Miller's camp because he really hasn't. His on-ice play has been great, and he's moved on in that respect. But from a personal side, the maturity piece kind of lacking.
There's two evil sorcerers in this too. That's also the Boston Bruins organization, because here's what they also did. The Boston Bruins said in their statement, trying to essentially excuse and explain away the reasoning for the signing, was one of the first things they said was, we've done our due diligence. The Athletic did a very simple due diligence check themselves and found that essentially everything the Boston Bruins have said was factually incorrect.
Yeah.
So I think it was Sean Gentile, the Athletic, that absolutely wrote the blank out of the Boston Bruins organization, and to Mitchell Miller, quite respectively, which is not only did Boston not consult the victims, they never consulted again Gary Bettman. It's very odd to see Gary Bettman actually kind of take a actual pointed stab, because mind you, Gary Bettman's an attorney by trade, right?
Yeah.
And when he defends the league for certain things, he kind of gives you word salad, he vagues away. These are very pointed comments,
very direct
from Gary Bettman. We normally don't see that, right?
And I laugh because everybody on Twitter kept posting that the worst person just made a great point.
Yeah, seriously. So that's it. It makes the situation very unique from that perspective. That what the hell is Boston doing right now? To your first point, had Mitchell Miller, we had some sort of indication that he actually has gone and apologized, and we have seen whether
personal growth,
personal growth, right? And we see a record of that. I'm not sure we're having this conversation.
Agree.
But because even till this day, when you have Boston, and again, somebody picked, I think it was Sean Gentile who said, so Boston didn't consult the players, they didn't consult the league. They say they consulted the family when they never did. They waited to announce the signing when the team was on the road. And I believe it was Patrice Bergeron and some of that are very unhappy with the signing too with the organization.
Which they talked about, it puts them in a difficult position that they should have no part of either.
Right. So wait a second. So Boston says they done due diligence when clearly they tried to skirt around everything. I think it's all it tells you who's really what they did. They did nothing. And
even when your own players and your captains are like, no, WTF, like I don't understand, and that's where,
right.
We've talked about this too. And you talked about the victim's family, and you talked about, there are some families who, damaging things like this happen, and they want, frankly, a lot more to come out of it. They want a lot more. The family simply wanted, closure.
Apology.
An apology. And for Mitchell Miller to be a better person. And the fact that you can't even, in his eyes, stoop so low as to be able to have a little bit of humility in some senses, to just be honest and apologize and sit down with the family and the victim and talk through things, shows to me that, we had the discussion with Shane Wright last week. The maturity side of things, you want to be an NHL player, you want to play at the Division I level, you want to play at the USHL level, you have to show the maturity and accountability, not only on the ice, but especially off the ice. And he is not even remotely close to that stratosphere. No.
And I think we have to mention to Noah that this wasn't just one incident. This was repeated incidents over a period of time. Granted, again, we've talked about the age of 14. We've all done stupid crap, right?
Yeah. We covered this on our show, and we partially defended him because we said North Dakota dropped him, Arizona dropped him. Let's see what it is in the USHL. Let's see if he rights the ship a little bit. Let's see if he can, same with the Logan Mailloux situation as well, too, who recently got signed with the Canadiens. Let's see if he's able to do that. I think the Logan Mailloux situation is looking a little bit better than this situation, but they're both not great. Young men who, that for whatever reason follow this path of immaturity. And like I said, we've all done dumb stuff at 14, 15, almost 26. In my case, I've done stupid things this week, but it's one thing to do something dumb. It's another thing, the level of dumbness that you have. And number three, do you recognize your actions? Do you learn from your actions? Do you grow from your actions?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you taking accountability for it? And that's really where this conversation has gotten everybody so fired up, Noah, is that it's one thing to do. And first of all, these are very heinous acts, so they're part of what makes this such a maddening topic. Is it wasn't just like there was maybe some name calling and, which is still bad. I'm not trying to reduce what that is. Right.
Yeah.
It's the fact that this person is sort of has a mental disability. So shall I say they can't really help themselves? We don't know this person, but it's less likely, right?
And you can't take the action back,
Right. And it wasn't just that. And not only to do that, not just once, but repeatedly.
Yep.
And then to not have the self-accountability to be offered an apology. And again, this is 7 years later.
Yeah.
And again, I think Gary Bettman's words speaks for themselves. His code of conduct does not make him eligible in the NHL, nor may it ever. I think that was definitely a very shot across the bow from Gary Bettman. And the AHL exploring their bylaws to see if he would even be eligible. I would presume that he will not skate a single game professionally this season.
Yeah.
Nope. I just can't see it.
You know what's interesting? We talk about Hockey Canada, everyone's favorite organization, right? And we talk about the Chicago Blackhawks too. Last year, we talk about the term tone deaf, and I think the thing that makes it even more damning is, what goes through my mind is, what was Mitchell Miller thinking? And I'm not talking about 7 years ago. I'm talking about, how do you get dropped from realistically one of the best organizations in college hockey, dropped by the team that drafted you in the National Hockey League, have all this backlash, and granted, he responded well on the ice in the USHL, so good for him, I guess.
That's not what needs to be done.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, all of those things happened, and yet you couldn't take a year and a half of soul searching to figure out what you needed to do to not be a total scumbag of a shitty person, essentially. And you couldn't figure that out enough to be better as a person, so that all of us around the hockey world could at least look and say, you know what? The kid's making progress. It might take him 4 years before we're finally like, yeah, we've seen enough to feel like it. But he took no time to reflect on the absolute negative backlash that he has gotten in the past year and a half and say, maybe there is something to how I've been acting as a person. Like I said, being 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, there's a lot of developments brain-wise and personality-wise and human-wise that certainly, you're not the same person at 25 that you are at 21. But with that being said, there was no self-reflection. There's been no indication of that. And like you talked about, the article in The Athletic ripping people apart. With that being said, I have yet to see an article or a handful of articles that say, well, no, when he was in the USHL, actually his coaches said this, or actually he was acting like this, or actually he was doing this. There's been no defense of him, because it's indefensible, because he hasn't done anything.
Let's take it one step further. Do not tell me that if you're Mitchell Miller, when you're first drafted by the Coyotes and this news first comes out, you get dropped by the team that drafted you, you get dropped by the University of North Dakota, that somebody out there isn't in his ear going, your hockey career is in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And this is the simple things that you have to do. And if you do that, it's never going to completely clear out the history that you've done, but you can at least start to move things forward for not only for yourself, but for the victim and the victim's family, right? So I have a hard time believing, and I think that's what makes this worse. I can't imagine a scenario where somebody or multiple people haven't told him what he's had to do to try to at least make this as right as it can be for the amount of time that's passed, and to still not have done any of that makes it even more reprehensible and might be even more upsetting.
It's brutal. So yeah,
that's to me, right? I agree. He's been told.
I concur 110%. I don't want to give it any more time, because it pisses me off, honestly. Yeah. Other side of this, other news, a story that we've been tracking for the past year or so, former Western Michigan University hockey captain Paul Washe, accused in a 2021 rape, was sentenced to probation on Friday following a guilty plea to sex crimes months earlier. So Paul Washe, who of course is 23 now, pled on August 23rd to one count of seduction as part of a plea offer from the Kalamazoo County Prosecutor's Office, which agrees to dismiss the 2 counts of third-degree criminal sexual assault connected to the December 2021 alleged sexual assault of an 18-year-old Western Michigan student. There were a lot of allegations against him in addition to this that came out, but this is the one that essentially we went through the court process with. For those who are curious, because Nick and I were very curious about it before we started the show and talked about what is seduction under Michigan law. It's actually was written in the 1840s and hasn't been changed since the 1930s. So, quote saying, any man who shall seduce any unmarried woman shall be guilty of a felony, a 5-year maximum in-state prison upon conviction, and a max fine of $2,500. So that's the high end of what this seduction, but the short statute of limitations applies to seduction cases. They cannot be tried once 1 year has passed since the date of the alleged offense, which can be waived, of course, by the defendant. The crime requires a man to be the actor and the woman as the victim. And the law is based on the idea that the man persuaded or induced the woman to submit to his sexual embraces when she would have not acted in this way otherwise. As we've talked about in this situation before, it's deemed that alcohol was likely been a factor. And why would you take a plea deal? One of the pieces here, you can be required to register for 15 years to life, depending on the serious of first or third degree, which in this case, third degree criminal sexual conduct charge. And he had 2 of those. So it would be 2 potentially maximum 15-year sentences and a lifetime registry for the sex offender registry. With this plea deal, he does not. Nick, you kind of walked me through it before the show a little bit about kind of the nuances and intricacies of what this means if you're someone who takes a plea deal, why the prosecution would initiate a plea deal, and kind of the differences between this. Can you kind of walk our listeners and viewers through the latest developments for Paul Washe?
I knew you'd put me on the spot with this. Okay.
Hey, you're the one
I
who
know.
walked through it well.
I know. So, well, I think before I do that, I want to preface that, it still doesn't change the victim in this case, right? It doesn't change.
We don't condone anything, of this.
Right? Yeah. But here's where, in the state of Michigan, apparently, and to their view, and it's not just a plea deal in my eyes. I mentioned that with the allegations that were there, right? Anytime that alcohol is involved, and I think that the biggest, like the marquee case, was in Tennessee, like 10 years ago. And different states rule on this a little bit differently. I don't think in Minnesota, first of all, this law doesn't exist. And number 2, alcohol is not seen as, shall we say, it doesn't matter. Let's put it that way. In most cases, right? I believe that in this case, right, and again, for criminal sexual conduct, there has to be at least some strong case of like forced intent or malintent.
A prime example of this, for those who are wondering, the Hockey Canada case right now.
Yep. So, and to me, I don't know, like based on the interviews with the victim and Washe, what happened, but it sounds like the prosecution didn't feel comfortable or confident that they were going to win that battle. That's how I see it. Now, I could be completely wrong, because we've also seen this too, Noah, where when you get to the case where this gets litigated, meaning it goes in front of a judge or a jury and you got to rehash everything out, right? As the victim, if you have a strong attorney on the defense side, they could rip that apart. Yeah. So what this sort of law in Michigan does is allows Washe to get charged with something. Because I mean, let's be honest, like seduction is it's not nearly as bad, right?
And you talked about how difficult some of these things are, unfortunately, to prove. And a prime example in Michigan, for those who are curious, another comparable case, 2018, 3 Michigan State University football players and an alleged female in a similar case. Just if people want some sort of comparison. Right.
So, and you kind of wonder, was this a victim request? Or was this the prosecution going back to the victim and says, hey, this is what we have. We, based on what we think we can prove, I don't know if we're going to be able to get this, but if we offer this to him and he accepts, again, the big difference here is he doesn't have to register as a sex offender. That's huge, especially for him, right? 2, he pleads guilty, so he's admitting to something, right? So there is accountability in some sense, right? And now the secondary part, I think the sentencing is probation, essentially, is what.
Yeah, no jail time. No jail time. And no sex offender registry, like you mentioned.
So was this an offering from the victim? Was this a driven, or a fact-driven type thing? I don't know. But again, going back to the top is, it doesn't take away what happened in terms of how the victim felt. I think that has to be. We have to remind folks of that. So I'm not advocating that he's innocent or he's not. I'm not taking sides to this. I'm just trying to help explain why this is the conclusion that it reached. And more so, again, just like in the Mitchell Miller situation, is there going to be a formal apology? Like, what's the next steps then? Because probation is just the legal requirements. And I don't know if he has apologized. I guess maybe that's a better question. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, maybe the victim doesn't want any part of that. And again, like I said, for someone who was put on the spot, you explained it very eloquently. So thank you for that. But, and that's the thing that is important to point out is we haven't really had a strong update in this since maybe the spring.
It's been kept under wraps pretty nice.
So kind of important. And he didn't answer any questions with the media, Paul Washington. So our goal was to just say, hey, we finally got an update on this. Here are the facts. Here's what we know. Here's a potential interpretation of why this may have come and all the avenues and options there. So giving listeners essentially what a breakdown might be for this. Nick, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that? Or
at the end of the day, again, if you're, I think the biggest thing we didn't mention, if you are a victim of sexual violence or abuse, make sure you go through the proper channels, make sure it gets reported, have a strong support system, at the end of the day.
And certainly, unfortunately in today's world, especially if you're female, but anybody, obviously, make sure you're paying attention to your surroundings and where you're at, and that you have friends with you and those sorts of things, because these things are just brutal to happen, and you don't want to put yourself in a potential spot where this might happen to you. So, because there are some really poor people out there in the world that do some really messed up things, unfortunately. So, but what we do is we cover hockey, and we are excited for it. Of course, men's hockey at home against Western Michigan, women's hockey at home against Duluth. It's actually a doubleheader at home for this group. So important to make sure that if you're a Huskies fan, you are getting to the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center this weekend to watch a ton of hockey here. So, it should be very exciting. Of course, the Wild, Los Angeles on the road on Tuesday, on the road Thursday, Friday in Anaheim and Seattle, Sunday back home in San Jose. We'll have 3 of those 4 games to cover for you. That will do it for episode number 136. For Nick Maxon, I am Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.